there's magic coming. Oh, there's magic coming. Oh, there's magic coming. Where you gonna be tonight? Oh, there's magic coming. Oh, there's magic coming. There's magic coming. Get ready for the rest of your life. Hello, beautiful humans, and welcome to SassafrasCast. My name is Rorie Kelly, and I am a tarot reader, singer-songwriter, and all-around spiritual growth nerd from Long Island, New York. And I'm pulling out my SassafrasCast document so I say all the things to you that I wish to say today. In just a moment, we will begin the Witchy Weather Report, but first, a shout out to my patrons. If you don't know, you can support this podcast at patreon.com/Sassafras Tarot for $1 per month or more. I record these episodes live, and my patrons get a private YouTube link before each one so that they can tune in for the live recording, hang out in the chat, ask questions, and get them answered in real time. They also get access to a witchy Discord server, and they get a shout out in every episode. Are you ready? Here we go. Shout out to... Hang on, I'm pulling up the Patreon list because I want to make sure, I think there's one or two newbies and I want to make sure I get all of you. Shout out to Amanda Curry, Rachel Miller, Grayson, Periwinkle Twilight, Rebecca Jones, Brittany, Hannah Westlock, Brittany Campbell, Jennifer McPhail, Ondine, and Melissa Longo. Thank you all so much for being a part of my world. I'm about to pull a tarot card for the Witchy Weather Report, and I'm also going to share with you a little bit of kind of just like the vibe of the moment. If you're listening to this in real time, either in the moment that I record it, if you're a patron, which is Saturday, November 16th, or maybe about a week later, anywhere from 2 days to a week later, depending on how quickly I get the episode out after that. If you're listening to it as it releases, I have some astrological info that will be relevant to you. If you're listening to it way after, sit tight, because the tarot card that I pull will be for wherever and whenever it finds you. So right at this moment in time in November, in the United States, we have just had an election, and for me and mine and many of those that are in my community, it did not go the way we hoped it would go, and there's a great deal of fear right now, which is the inspiration for this episode, Witchery for Troubled Times. We also have had a really interesting new to full moon cycle just culminate in a full moon in Taurus. We're in Scorpio season. We started off with a new moon in Scorpio right at the beginning of the month. And my personal, this is unverified personal gnosis. In other words, it's kind of my experience of things and how I see things, both as a tarot reader and a human being kind of around myself and my community. The way I see this particular moon cycle is that we were meant to identify these deep Scorpio truths about ourselves during this season's moon cycle, meaning the parts of ourselves that perhaps are sometimes deep and hidden, but they are also resilient and unchanging. The parts of ourselves that are our deepest, realest truth that do not change and should be honored and sometimes get lost in the flow because other stuff gets piled upon them, and the unraveling that happens during Scorpio season is almost like an annual declutter where we kind of pull back the mess and put aside what is unimportant and like hold high and varnish our deepest truths, allow them to once again be the beacons that guide us through. And that is kind of my understanding on a very personal level, so take it or leave it, of this moon cycle in Scorpio season that started with a new moon in Scorpio. It was about us being willing to find our truths and being willing to take steps to reestablish them as being a cornerstone of our lives. To look at ways we may have deviated from those deep inner truths and deep inner values and say, okay, now I am reorienting myself. I am refocusing myself on my deepest truths and living accordingly and making changes accordingly. And this recent full moon that we just had, which is in the sign of Taurus, is an opportunity for us not just to kind of come to a culmination with that intention for ourselves, but also to have identified over the last 2 weeks, okay, what's standing in the way of us living our truth, and therefore what has to go. We're undergoing a spiritual and emotional decluttering at the moment. And so if that resonates for you, I encourage you during these next 2 weeks, again, if you're listening like right around the time of the full moon, I'm recording this on November 16th. I encourage you to allow yourself to let things settle for the next 2 weeks, to not make it be about taking gigantic new actions, but instead almost intentionally allow yourself to undergo that kind of emotional and spiritual decluttering, to say, I know that what I need is to focus on this, and therefore if this, and this are in the way, then I'm cleaning out the closet, so to speak. I'm allowing myself to move things out, to say no to things, so that I can surrender into my deepest truth when I have completed that process. That is the process I am personally undergoing in my life. It's very much a say no to say yes, saying no to what just isn't it for me, so that I can surrender deeply into what is it for me, meaning my truth, my purpose, my calling, my highest values. Now I will pull a card for everybody. And when I reach this point of the podcast, I pull a card, and this is not meant to be a moment in, it is a moment in time that I'm pulling it, of course. It's not meant to be attached to the time. So if you are listening right now as I record it, if you are listening a week later when you get around to it, if you are listening to it 3 years later because you found my podcast, whenever you came to it, this card is meant to have something for you right now as you're hearing it. I'm reading today with the Everyday Witch Tarot by Deborah Blake, with art by Elizabeth Alba. And you should also know, here in November, the card I pulled for the month for all of us in the Witchy Weather Report a couple weeks ago was the Emperor. We're all being called to leadership. To redefine leadership is really where it's at. To ask ourselves what it looks like to own our vision and establish our vision and take steps towards it. And own our ability not just to go after our dreams for ourselves, but to lead. To lead, to bring other people in, and to be in authority on those things that we know we have the right to authority on. You know, our topics of expertise. And here is the calling for us all right now. It's the High Priestess. We're asked to go within. The High Priestess has a very, very personal experience of spirituality and intuition and inner wisdom. The High Priestess is more likely to be spiritual than religious, although you could look at her as well as being a part of a religious order. But you might identify the High Priestess more along what you would expect of like someone who spends a great deal of time in thought and study and prayer, rather than someone who is a public figurehead, which is more of the Hierophant. The High Priestess is deeply committed to her values and deeply committed to seeking spiritual truth. Now, some of that truth comes from her own reflection and philosophy. It's just straight up wisdom from experience and thought and study. And some of that truth feels more esoteric. It comes from her leaning into meditation. It comes from her seeking guidance from voices beyond herself. And so, to have a conversation with a High Priestess, if you're not used to pursuing life in that way, it can feel a bit mysterious. She can say things that maybe don't click with you in the moment, but 2 weeks later you suddenly understand what she meant and it has relevance for you. The High Priestess is a little bit like getting a tarot reading in that way. And we're asked to lean into that energy of seeking the truth, and we won't always understand the direction we're being pulled until it's time for us to understand it. So there is a mix here of analytical rigor showing up for thoughts and analysis and looking wisely at what's in front of us and considering it, as well as the ability to be patient, to tune in beyond our ability to analyze, especially around problems that seem to have no solution, It's not time for us to throw up our hands or to dig deeper or to bang our heads against the wall. It's time to be patient and trust that the answers we need will reveal themselves if we continue to show up with an open heart. And that is the lesson of the High Priestess. So I encourage you to apply this both in your personal life and in your political life. I'm going to be talking a lot in this episode about the personal and the political. Our mothers of the feminist movement brought this phrase to us: the personal is political. The political is also personal. Both of those things hold true. We're in a time here in the States where we don't know what the future will hold. We just had a pretty big election, and the person who was elected is attached to a far-right movement and Project 2025, which are things that you can kind of look up if you want to do some research on. I'm not going to spend a lot of time kind of defining politics for you in this episode, but I will share with you that this is a podcast that is for justice, and this is a podcast that believes in equality and equity and is actively anti-racist and anti-bigotry and anti-sexist and truly any form of bigotry and anti-discrimination. And if that doesn't work for you, it's okay if you don't want to listen to this podcast, because it won't change. I think it's important in these times that we come out personally and be honest and forthright about what our values are. And I'll be talking about the personal and the political in this podcast, about what it means to allow the personal to become political. And we have seen this again with our ancestors in the feminist movement, creating things like women's circles where women could share freely about their experiences and had the opportunity to come together in a safe space and realize that many of the individual struggles they were facing that they thought were their struggles alone were in fact unique struggles that were perhaps systemic to a patriarchal society. And in this way, the personal became political. There was a realization, oh, it's not just me. This is a bigger problem that needs to be addressed on a bigger level than simply my household. Additionally, the inverse is also true. The political is personal. We're in the middle of a bunch of people on the internet really trying to convince you that politics are not personal. And I'm here to lovingly tell them that they're wrong. Politics are deeply personal because the people in charge of governing our nation have an impact on each individual person that their governance oversees. And when a law is passed, it has a personal impact on different people. We're experiencing right now, women are experiencing kind of a really terrifying time where reproductive rights are being rolled back, and laws have been passed in different states outlawing abortion at different times and sometimes altogether. And the laws are worded such that a woman who needs medical emergency attention for a miscarriage, for example, can't access it. Women have been dying. And that's not political. It's deeply personal. It's deeply personal if you are or know someone who could get pregnant and lives in a place affected by these laws. And it's personal now as we wonder what will happen in the next 4 years. And I'm urging people to allow it to be personal. When we say, oh, it's just politics, what we say is these things aren't important. And in truth, they're deeply important. You know, we live in a republic, which means that we have elected leaders to represent us. It's not a direct democracy, which would be everyone voting on everything all the time. It's a republic, meaning we elect leaders. Here, this is again, very particular to the States. So if you're not in the States, I apologize, because this will be a little bit America-centric, this episode. We elect representatives in the good faith, or the hope, that they will represent our values when it comes to making laws for the nation and governing us. And that's deeply personal. You know, we're electing somebody to have a big say-so over things in our lives. And so when we say it's just politics, what that does is it allows us to make this intellectual leap that it's not that important and it doesn't matter that much, when in fact these things do have a dramatic impact on individuals on a very personal level. And so we'll be talking in this episode about how the personal is political and the political is personal. And we'll be talking too about moving our own view from the personal to the political and from the political to the personal, because that is what we must do as foot soldiers of justice. Let's kind of move into the work for today. The topic of today's podcast is Witchery for Troubled Times. And I will be sharing some straight up witchcraft ideas for troubled times throughout this episode. And our Witch You Got This segment is going to be actually a summoning spell for purpose and action. And I'm choosing to focus on that because spells and incantations are much like thoughts and prayers. Now, here's the story. Thoughts and prayers don't get the work done. Individual people with two hands do. It's beautiful and important to focus our attention and our intention by keeping someone in our thoughts so that perhaps we can generate thoughts of ways to help them or ways to show up for them, or just out of our own, like allowing our compassion to flow in that way. It's beautiful to focus our intention on things like prayers or spells or magic to attempt to whatever, affect change in a more esoteric kind of energy movement type of way. But at the end of the day, even if that is what we think we're doing with our prayers and our spells, what we're asking the energy to do is find people who are willing to channel that energy and physically be the two hands that get the change done, right? If somebody you know is on the verge of homelessness and you're praying for help for them, you're not just praying that like a giant Monty Python hand reaches out of the sky and scoops them up and puts them into a bed. No, you're praying for a human being to be able to find them and give them housing. You're praying for the two hands of an active human who cares enough to do something to impact another human being. So we're going to be reminding ourselves throughout this episode that thoughts and prayers are not the thing that get it done. Our own two hands get it done. Focusing our thoughts is important. And our spiritual lives for many of us is very important and is a source of comfort. So I'm not telling us not to do that. I am, however, telling us that when we get so caught up in thoughts and prayers and spells and magic, we forget the most powerful tools at our disposal, which are our brains, our voices, and our hands. That is where we can do the most good work. What is the work? Witchery for troubled times. Many of us are seeking care. Many of us are desperately in need of care at this moment. And I'm here to tell you that your need for care is not selfish, nor is it pointless, nor is it beside the point. We all need to take care of ourselves and each other first and foremost at this time. Because as we move into times that do feel more and more troubled, where we feel that there is turmoil, where we feel that there are vulnerable people amongst us who may get, at best, lost in the fray, or at worst, really harmed or even killed by things like bigotry, by things like unjust laws, by the empowerment that happens when a certain administration sets the tone and bigoted people feel the ability to freely speak and act on their bigotry. We saw an increase of hate crimes with the first Trump presidency. We already in this week are seeing an increase of some striking and startling misogyny that I won't give airtime to here, but I'm sure you've seen it on a very public playing field, with very little negative reaction, with very little consequences to those, outspokenly just voicing their bigotry, voicing their misogyny. And that's where it's just politics, it's not personal, fails us, because it is personal when someone around us is speaking hate. It is personal because another human being is personally affected by that hate. And it's important for us at this time in our lives to be upstanders rather than bystanders, to stand up rather than stand by, and do our best to be foot soldiers of justice, to show up for what is right in the way that we can. And yes, we should consider our safety in this. And also, I have to say, we should not allow that to be a cop-out. We must think creatively. When there is hate being spoken, or even worse, perpetrated, when we're watching violence potentially play out, when we're watching an exchange between two people that we know could escalate in a very dark way, when we're watching things happen, it's important for us to ask ourselves how we can stand up rather than standing by. And if our first thought is a fearful one, that's human and natural. But I'm here to tell you that it's important then for us to engage our creative brain and ask us, is there a way to bypass the danger so that I can still act? And I have to tell you, I speak to many different people of many different backgrounds around this kind of thing, around activism, like the very direct kind of activism that comes with intervening. And the people I hear, sorry, I'm about to call y'all out if you're listening. The people I hear the most talk about but it's not safe, are white men. Straight cisgendered white men telling me that they don't feel safe when one of their brothers is perpetrating some kind of hate, and it feels like it's going to escalate into a fight and into violence. And especially if they're, kind of on the less gender conforming side, they already have this fear that they already don't look at me as a real man, and they're going to be, harmful and violent to me, and it's dangerous to me. And I'm here to say it's more dangerous to me. It's more dangerous to me than it is to you as a woman, than it is to a man. And it's even more dangerous to a woman of color. And it's, further dangerous the more marginalized your identity is. And we need those of us who have privilege, and all of us have some privilege and some oppression. This is a sermon, y'all. I apologize in advance, but this is the topic of this podcast. I'm getting very politically real with us. Those of us with privilege need to, at this time, ask ourselves how we can leverage that privilege. We need to stop the narrative of I can't apologize for my privilege, and I've had things hard too. No one's asking you to apologize for your privilege. Instead, though, acknowledge it and leverage it, right? That is how we can create good change, right? I have privilege as a white woman, and that my voice is a little more heard and a little more prevalent and a little more heated than that of a black woman, than that of a woman of color. And it's important for me to leverage that privilege, not to sit and feel bad about it, not to use it selfishly, but to leverage it, for example, to boost up and signal boost the voices of women of color. There have been a lot of Black women's voices on my timeline on different social media, and I have found their contributions to the conversation in the last 2 weeks to be incredibly valuable. And also I see incredible despair as I look at this community of people who have contributed so much to our social justice movements and keep getting left behind by them. And so for me, as a white woman, the way to leverage my privilege is, first of all, to signal boost them, to raise their voices up by sharing, retweeting, or saying, wow, what if I'm in person, what so-and-so had to say is very important. Could you repeat that? Because I think we could all listen. Amplifying rather than making it be about my voice. That's something anyone with privilege can do. And further, to use our privilege with our peers, right? I, as a white woman, have a responsibility when talking to other white women to call them in rather than let things fly. To have the difficult conversations and show up for equity and equality and anti-racism rather than kind of let it go because that might be more comfortable. That's a way I can leverage my privilege as well, because another white woman is more likely to listen to me. And that's, I think, uncomfortable for those of us who have that type of privilege. It's uncomfortable to acknowledge it. It's uncomfortable because that's an acknowledgement of power that we didn't ask for and don't particularly want. And on the other hand, in troubled times, we look at the tools that we have and we ask ourselves, how can I use them for good? It's not a good thing that I have white privilege, but it is a true thing that I have white privilege. And so I can do what I can with that to create a more just and equitable society. And I can think creatively about how I can do that. we've been talking very, very politically so far, and this is kind of on an interpersonal level, which can be either kind of global. The internet gives us a global stage in our community, which different of us will have different levels of, of influence in different community groups we belong to. And very personal in our one-on-one conversations. I want to take it a step even more personal and talk about self-care. Because I feel that many of us at this time are called to be foot soldiers of justice. I have felt a growing concern as I've looked at the last couple presidential elections in the US that for a full year around the election, every conversation for a certain subset of people, not for everybody, begins and ends with vote. It begins and ends with, it's important to vote. That's why we have to take our outrage to the ballot box, And while it's true that voting is an important way to use our voice, and in my opinion, a civic responsibility, while that is true, it is not the beginning and ending of activism. And when I think there's a fear that there are people who may not vote or may choose to sit the election out, or in some circles, the fear is that they will vote third party and ruin, quote unquote, I'm doing air quotes if you're not watching the video, ruin the election by doing so. That this fear leads the conversation to become so focused on voting, we have to get the vote out. It is important that we vote. And it is important that we make a wise and mindful decision. And unfortunately, I believe there does have to be some level of political savvy to that decision. Our vote is not an opinion poll about what your favorite flavor of M&Ms are. It's not even an opinion poll about like what you believe in terms of your values. It's specifically a strategic question about who do you think is the person who should be in charge right now of the country, and taking a look at the lay of the land in the country too. Like, unfortunately, we have to sometimes not vote for someone, but vote against someone else. You know what I mean? That's my personal belief. And that's a lot of responsibility to ask of ourselves, but it only comes around every so often. It's really not, we could, I think we should ask ourselves more. I think we should ask more of ourselves. And I think, yes, we should show up and vote. And also every single day, not just every 4 years, our activism should and can take the form of showing up for our community, showing up on a global and a local and a very personal level for the world we wish to see. Let's talk about that very personal level, because I started this podcast by saying that a lot of people are craving care right now. And for a lot of people, there's a fierce desire to take action and also a stuckness I'm seeing. And I'm grateful that that I'm in online circles where there's discourse about this. I'm seeing that a lot of us are kind of operating from like a fight, flight, or freeze state, or a functional freeze state is another term I've heard, where yes, we're functioning, we're getting through the day, but it feels like a slog and it feels very challenging. And our nervous system is kind of making it challenging for us to do any more than just get through. And at a time when we feel more pulled than ever towards we have to make things right, we have to show up for our community, we have to show up for our world, I see a lot of very, very good people, very dedicated people wishing to make positive change, who are themselves so individually kind of devastated by their fear, by their anger, by their despair, that it's very difficult for them to even get through the day. And so it's asking quite a lot of ourselves to push ourselves in that time, not only to do that, but to show up in a greater way for our community, in a greater way for our values, in a greater way for activism. And so I'm going to spend a moment imploring you to take wonderful care of yourself. The analogy that I use when I talk about showing up for justice and showing up for activism is being a foot soldier of justice. This has become a catchphrase of mine. And the reason that I use this phrase is because it allocates the correct amount of responsibility on one person's shoulders. Hydration checkpoint, everybody. I always invite you to hydrate with me when I do that. It allocates the correct amount of responsibility on our shoulders to say, I am showing up as a foot soldier of justice today. We are not the general. We are not the king or the president. We are not the ones running the war. And I recognize that this is a little bit of a, not a particularly peaceful, metaphor that I've made here, but stay with me. We're not the ones making the huge sweeping decisions. Most of us aren't. That affect so many people at once. We are one person with two hands and one voice and one brain who can do what we can do, right? And so when we ask ourselves to show up as a foot soldier of justice, we're acknowledging, no, we cannot control the situation. Yes, we can have some influence, and the level of influence is determined by our personal circumstances. And so we can gauge whether we're doing our best to show up for justice by asking ourselves, am I using my influence, my personal abilities, to the best of my ability? We can't ask ourselves to solve the world's problem overnight. If one person could solve the world's problems overnight, someone would have done it by now. Instead, we need to ask ourselves simply to do our part. Not to ignore the work that must be done, and also not to try to sign ourselves up for more than it is possible for us to do. And when we talk about doing our best, it's important to know that built into doing your best is our best allowing for excellent self-care. And that's because if we do our best and run ourselves ragged today in so doing, I'm doing everything I can. Everything I can. It doesn't matter what I need because these problems are bigger than me. And we fall into bed and only grab a few hours of sleep and are completely depleted, then we can't be at our best tomorrow when the fight must continue, right? So part of being a foot soldier is understanding endurance and resilience and taking care of your tools, your weaponry, your armor, and your body so that you can do your best today and you can also do your best tomorrow, because we quickly get diminishing returns when we don't show up for those basic types of care. And so when we talk about witchery for troubled times, I'm also talking a great deal about self-care magic, and self-care work, which includes, for me at this time, it's included a lot of inner work. Now, y'all know I'm a shadow work nerd, and I'm also in the middle of teaching an intuition class, so that might have a thing or two to do with it. But I will tell you that the first week of that class, it's a 6-week class on tuning into your intuition. We're in the middle of, we just finished the second week. And my intention was to focus partly on emotional wisdom, tuning in for our feelings, showing up for our emotional bodies, and partly on our intuition, because those two things go hand in hand. And the whole first week happened directly after the election, and I threw intuition out the window in the intuition class, and I said, we are focusing solely on our feelings this week. And it's because that is me using my own brain and eyes to assess the situation in front of me and to understand now is not a time to ask ourselves to lean into this skill of intuition when what is deeply, deeply at the forefront of our consciousness is these big, big emotions demanding attention, demanding care. We won't get anywhere with our intuition if we don't care for our emotions. And similarly, we won't be able to make good choices in our activism and in our personal lives, in our personal and political lives, which I kind of submit to you as a spectrum, from very, very personal, you, yourself, and you, to, political on kind of a global stage. We won't be able to make those good decisions unless we're showing up for ourselves. If we're feeling so much rage and despair that we're unable to kind of think straight, it's not always the best time for action. Sometimes action has to be taken no matter how we feel, right? And there's amazing stories of things like mothers lifting cars off of their children in the moment because the power of the situation said, like, they found it. They dug deep and they found it to do the thing that was needed. But during troubled times, it's more about resilience. It's more about creating the ability to show up for yourself so that you can continue to show up day after day. And I promise you, a mother who just lifted a car off of a toddler is going to need a significant amount of physical and emotional care Like not the next day, but within the next hour, right? There are times when we are called to do great feats, but there are many more times when we are called to look at what's in front of us and do our best today, and do our best tomorrow, and do our best the next day, and do our best to steer our personal ship and that of our community towards justice, towards the right. By the right, I mean like the correct, what we believe in, our values. And so we have to take wonderful care of ourselves. And I'm going to even suggest, well, I'll tell you straight up, what I'm doing is I've made rules for myself that are very strict for the month of November. And they're based on my own self-care toolbox. And I've got some episodes of the podcast that are specifically about developing a self-care toolbox. So feel free to kind of scroll back through and listen to some of that if cultivating that might be useful to you right now. For me, it's taking my walks every day. That's a spiritual practice for me. Writing in my journal as often as I can, making sure that I get enough sleep. And I'm finding at this time that I am suffering from some level of insomnia. I think many people are. And so my commitment to myself becomes be in bed enough hours to get enough sleep. With the understanding that that might be more hours than usual, because there may be some time where I'm stressing rather than sleeping, but my body still does need the sleep. So to give myself the opportunity to rest as best I can and take care of my physical, squishy human body. Getting in movement, eating food that will nourish me and that will fuel me, and that will help me, with my nervous system and everything. And also that feels comforting and good to eat. Like, it's not a time, in my opinion, to go on a dramatic diet. It's, if you're already on that journey and it's important to you, like, I'm not here to take it away from you, but, when we're fighting in hard mode, I don't recommend putting other parts of your life on hard mode. We have a certain amount of willpower every day. And so part of the self-care is to constantly be replenishing that rather than constantly drawing on that. It's not self-care to constantly demand willpower of yourself, because then you run out and then you kind of like crash. And crashing is not helpful to ourselves or to the cause. So it's very much a time when we can justify self-care to ourselves by saying, self-care isn't just me. I'm caring for this foot soldier of justice. I am caring for someone who can make a difference. But this person I'm caring for, me, cannot make a difference if their basic needs are not met. They cannot make a difference if they're so overwhelmed that they can't think straight. They can make the best difference when they're well taken care of. How about magic? Protective magic has been helpful to me, whether it's simply psychologically or magically, speaking. If it's like helped in some way, I can't say. And I would say that when protective magic is working, you shouldn't be able to say because it's just working, right? And for me, I do the very basic thing that I think is taught fairly frequently in kind of like witchy classes, of envisioning a protective bubble around myself. And the qualities that I imagine this bubble having are that good and nourishing energy and information can flow right through to me, but anything harmful bounces off and returns to sender. And that is helpful to me psychologically to do every day. And whether it's helpful on an energetic level, I choose to believe that it is. I feel that it helps me. And, whether that's just a feeling or if it's magic, it's hard to tell. And I feel like that's a good thing, that it's hard to tell. That means that I'm feeling a bit protected, which is my goal. And creating that sense of feeling protected and feeling safe is often what allows the wiser part of our brain to operate. I have had a few conversations with people in my classes and in my communities lately where they've talked about emotional safety and how difficult it is to get out of fight or flight mode if there's no emotional safety available. If we can cultivate for ourselves, if we can create our own bubble of protection, and I mean this magically as well as personally, we'll spend more time in a feeling of emotional safety, and that's where we'll make better decisions. Because when we are constantly feeling like we're not safe, we're not comfortable, at some point our emotions just start screaming at us. And it's very difficult to make decisions when someone is screaming at you, even if it's yourself. So I encourage you to cultivate a sense of emotional safety, both by doing perhaps protective magic, carrying black crystals with you, or a protective amulet, or an evil eye charm, or visualizing a personal bubble around yourself, or asking a protective spirit or a guardian angel or guide that you work with to look after you and look over you. Yes, those spiritual ways of cultivating a sense of safety are helpful, and also cultivating a sense of safety by identifying who are the safe people I can share with, who are people who will understand and have my back and are kind of on the same team as me, because that camaraderie can be really, really helpful. Who is someone who understands me well enough to know that I'm doing my best, but pick up the slack for me if I fall down. Knowing that I would do the same for them, right? Having each other's backs at this time. And we can even think a bit beyond ourselves and ask, who can I look out for in that way? Are there people who may be struggling more than I am, or simply the same as I am and at different times, that I can show up for and be like, sometimes you've had my back and right now I have your back. And I'm asking myself in particular, as a white woman, I'm asking myself that about Black women in particular right now, because Black women have led and contributed so much to so many social justice movements, and overwhelmingly turned up at the polls to vote for Kamala Harris. And 52% of white women did not do that. And it's time for me as a white woman to ask myself what I can do to make that situation much better, and what I can do to take weight off of the shoulders of my Black sisters, and what I can do to advocate for them instead of just for me or just for what I perceive to be women in general. We can ask ourselves how to extend our protective energy to others. And a word of caution, not everyone wants you to protect them magically, so I would recommend asking, even if you have wonderful intentions. It's a bit like there are people in like fundamentalist Christian communities who say things like, I'm going to pray for you. And sometimes I'm going to pray for you feels kind. And if I receive it with kindness, if it's said with kindness, if someone says, God bless you, I'm going to pray for you, you're in my prayers, and they mean that they're thinking of me and wishing me well in their own spiritual way, I'm thankful. But I think all of us who are not Christian and have kind of don't walk that mainstream have had brushes with people saying like, I'm going to pray for you. And it's a little nasty. It's like, I'm going to pray that you see the error of your ways, right? Similarly, that's not always welcome, right? And us offering protective magic to somebody for whom that does not resonate with them may not be welcome. And so it's worth checking in. I don't think there's ever anything wrong with, for example, a friend of mine made me a tiny little jar, a prosperity jar that I still shake. And we call it shaking our moneymaker, which is really cute. I shake when I feel like I need a little inflow. And she made that for me, and she didn't like ask my permission, but she also knows me, you know. I think it's okay to do something like make someone a protective amulet or buy them a protective crystal and say, hey, I was thinking of you and I'd like to give you this. And it's up to them to accept it or not, but we have to not let our feelings get hurt if they don't want it. We have to not take it personally if someone's path is different than ours. What about working with guides and archetypes and deities and spirits? Whatever you believe in, it's a good time to work if you do have this kind of like external practice where you're seeking beyond yourself and beyond your higher wisdom for guides, for archetypes, for deities, etc. It's a good time to work, and some of the right questions to ask right now are, how can I show up for the good work? How can I be a foot soldier of justice? How should I nurture myself today to show up tomorrow? I really encourage you to ask that question, because many of the people, at least that come into my community, I think I'm naturally a filter and attract the kind of person that I'm meant to work with in some way or meant to affect in some way. Many of the people who come into my community, they're more likely to have a great answer for how can I show up for other people, and less likely to remember to show up for themselves. So asking your guides or deities or spirits, how should I nurture myself today to show up tomorrow, is a helpful question to ask. How may I be protected and protect others? These how questions are very useful because they direct us towards action. And we may get the answer. We may get an answer that's reassuring that says, it's a bigger plan than you think, or I'm looking after you, or whatever. And that's a blessing for us and for our psychology to cultivate that sense of safety, but it doesn't let us off the hook for still doing what we can with our own two hands. A question that I often ask in prayer is, please connect me with opportunities to be of service. I don't always ask it in exactly that way, but that is the gist of what I'm asking. I ask to be connected with people who need me, meaning my gifts, my skills, my callings. I ask to be put in a position that I can show up and be like, yes, I am the person who can help with this. And whether it's, by having like some kind of a technical skill that someone else doesn't, and I can solve a problem in 5 minutes that they might, bang their head against the wall for 3 hours, for example, or whether it's more emotional and psychological and I can help them see the perspective they need to see, whatever it may be. I ask to be put in a position where I will be able to help. That is my most common prayer. And prayers and spells and incantations and rituals should always be followed up with action. We pair our thoughts and prayers and our spells and our spiritual leanings with action because our own two hands, our mind, our voice are what get it done. The action that we can take is calling out and calling in. Two different things. We call out those who frankly deserve to and need to be called out. Right now, I'm seeing some, but I wish it was more. I'm seeing some men call out really crappy misogyny and sexism. Call it out and say, what the hell are you saying? Do you hear yourself right now? And using their, privilege as men to call out another man, and say, that's not cool, man, to make it very, very clear that they're not a safe space for bigotry, that's calling out and it's important. And calling in is trying to find the conversation that will allow the person to not just feel like, okay, I better shut up, but to be ready to listen and understand and have a perspective shift. And, there's times when one is more appropriate than the other. There's times when it's clear that the person is like not about to have an epiphany right now about humanity and kindness. And you just need to do what you need to do. You need to stand up rather than stand by. And there are times when, and this is especially in our personal lives, we can try to make it clear to someone that we're disagreeing with them because we respect them enough to believe that they're willing to hear a different perspective and that they care enough to make a change if they believe that their values, should do that. And that's a calling in conversation. That's when we can be compassionate to one another and say, okay, you said something that feels like it smacks of misogyny, for example, or that actually kind of supports racism in a way that I bet you don't mean to do because I don't think you're a racist person. And do you want to talk this out with me? I'd like to share some things with you that you might not have considered yet. Like, that's calling in. It's when we can say, hey, I'm not telling you you're an asshole. I'm saying that you might not have thought of this. And I want to share it with you and see what you think about it in hopes of getting a perspective shift. And both of those, calling out and calling in, are both very real types of activism that take the political and make it personal. Being a helper is the realest work I know, and it's giving me the most hope. I know several people who work very, very closely with the homeless population here on Long Island and elsewhere. And one thing that gave me a lot of hope during the week of the election was knowing, okay, on Tuesday we all go vote. On Wednesday morning, no matter what happens, they're still going to be waking up and distributing, food and clothing and shelter to unhoused people who need it. No matter what happens on the America's national stage, those individuals will still be helping people on Wednesday morning and Thursday morning and Friday morning and the day after that and the day after that. Being a helper never goes out of style, no matter what's going on. Asking yourself how you can help. And this should be a mix of how are you called to help, what are you passionate about, and where do your practical skills lie. And we don't do this to a level that it depletes ourselves. We don't want to add so much to our plate that then we can't take good care of ourselves and can't be consistent. But asking ourselves, what can I do that maybe is unique to me? Again, that I might be able to do in 5 minutes because I have this particular skill set, but it might take someone else 3 hours, you know? How can I contribute in a way that's not hard for me, but is meaningful to somebody else? Because that's sustainable. Asking yourself, how can I help? And creative problem solving is a big part of it. Asking yourself on a very personal level, how can I help solve this problem? Being tuned in to problems that those with less privilege than you may face. And asking yourself what you can do. And to bring back this example of specifically men telling me, I'm afraid to intervene when I see something really bad go down because I'm afraid of violence. That's when creative problem solving is called for. And I've taken the opportunity to educate a few men like, hey, this is something women have been doing for each other for centuries, and you can do it this way. You don't have to do it by picking a fight. For example, if you see something going down at like a bar or a restaurant where somebody is either being super creepy towards a woman, you know what I mean? Or you see a conversation that you feel like might escalate into an abusive situation, like, one of those like arguments that you're like, oh, wow, this is not okay. And you ask yourself, how can I be a creative problem solver? Because many of our first impulse, if you're an angry person like me, is, I'm not angry about everything, but I am angry when I see someone being mistreated. Many of our first impulse is like, hey, like, you got a problem? You got a problem with this person? You got a problem with me? Like, you got to stop this behavior right now. But being confrontational like that may not be safe. It's also not the only way to stand up rather than standing by. For years, women have looked out for each other by seeing something weird going on between like a woman and a man who's like, in her face or whatever, and walking over and just kind of using social engineering to solve the problem. If it's a bartender and she's being kind of like yelled at or being like aggressively hit on or whatever by someone, and I see that it's gross, that's my cue to go over and order a drink and say, oh, I'm sorry, sir, but I've been waiting for a minute. Can you tell me what's in this cocktail or whatever? And I diffuse the situation in that way, not by starting a fight, but simply getting the person out of the uncomfortable conversation, right? Or even walking up and pretending to know someone and saying, oh, I'm so glad I ran into you. I still have that thing you lent me in your car. Can I walk you back so that I can give it to you? And then once you're out of earshot, kind of just being like, hey, I just want to make sure you're okay. These are ways that we can creatively problem solve. And so when you see something that you think I should stand up and I'm not sure how to do so safely, it's that creative problem solving that can come in. All right. I've been rambling and preaching a little bit, and I think you're getting where I'm coming from about this mix of spiritual and political and personal. And the spirituality doesn't have to be a part of taking political action, by the way. It's fueled a lot, I think, for a lot of the Black civil rights movement. Churches have played a large, beautiful role in that. And I've certainly seen a lot of people who are devout in a variety of faiths, and their faith is a part of their activism. They believe that they are doing the work of their faith, right? And I also know a lot of people who are atheist or agnostic. I'm a little bit agnostic, which is funny to say with my spiritual podcast, but here we are, who just do the work because they simply look at and they're like, this is the right work to do, therefore I do it, and they're passionate about that. So spirituality doesn't have to come into play. But I do think that psychological and emotional care should come into play in our activism, because we can't keep doing it if we're not caring for ourselves. And the people who help the most are the most prone to burnout. And so we have to do what we can to proactively avoid that for ourselves so that we can continue to be useful for others, and also to lead our lives. We're allowed to have lives. We're allowed to have joy even in difficult times. We're allowed. Life is short, and we are allowed to try to give ourselves a good life, even as we're trying to work towards a better world. We can do both. It's not wrong. And so for many of us, part of that psychological self-care is spirituality, is seeking hope in that way. But I encourage you, no matter what your beliefs, to seek hope, because Hope is what allows us to believe we can make a difference. And it's when people feel hopeless that they are most easily manipulated, when they feel, oh, well, what I do doesn't make a difference anyway. And that's when they start becoming complacent. And that's just a human psychology thing. It's not me blaming anyone for anything, but it is me saying that you can fight back about that by actively cultivating hope in your life. And I hope that you will. We move on to Which You Got This, which is a part of the podcast where I give you a single, easy action to try out around the topic we've been discussing today. And today I want to suggest to you a summoning spell. And what we're summoning is purpose and action. I talked about how thoughts and prayers don't get it done. Our own two hands get it done, right? And this summoning spell is akin to a road opening spell, something you may have heard of. If you want opportunities in your life, you may do a road opening spell. Meaning literally opening up paths, opening up opportunities for yourself. And here, my goal with this spell is to open up paths and opportunities for ourselves to seek and be instruments of justice, to seek and be instruments of compassion and kindness and doing the right thing and helping others. And so that's our summoning spell. And the thing about magic is when it works well, you don't always know that it works. Sometimes it's like, wow, that came out of nowhere. I had no idea. But sometimes, especially something like an opening spell, a road opening spell or a summoning spell, what happens is we just did this spell. And so our brain is like, okay, I'm looking, I'm ready for the spell to happen, right? And so we may simply see an opportunity because we've given ourselves the hope that it may happen. Whereas if we had not done the spell, if we're like, this is stupid, it's not going to do anything, we might sink into complacency in the absence of hope and not see the opportunity, right? It makes us look a little harder. It gives our brains a focus, and our brains love a focus. They love a task. So is it magic? Is it psychological? I am of the very personal opinion that it's a little bit of both, but even if it's just psychological, it's a win. You know, it makes a difference. It moves the needle. So here's what you'll need for this summoning spell for purpose and action. You will need pen and paper, or a pencil and paper, some kind of writing implement and paper. And what you're going to do is get still. Cultivate stillness in whatever way matters to you. You may wish to put yourself in a protective bubble. You may wish to do some meditating, which I'm going to simplify as just meaning focus on your breath and focus within. Meditation is a practice. You're not doing it wrong if your mind is wandering. You just bring yourself back. Allowing yourself to feel the breath moving through you. And kind of aligning your intention with that breath as you breathe in, envisioning that opportunities to act on your values are coming to you. And as you breathe out, envisioning that roadblocks are melting away. Just allowing yourself to be with your intention and with your body and your breath for a moment. And when you're feeling deeply yourself, no longer kind of fight, flight, freeze, but calmed by your focus on your breath and tuned in to what you intend to do, we're going to write a petition on this piece of paper. Now, a petition you may have heard in political terms. In magical terms, it's similar. It's basically saying, this is the thing I want, right? And in so many words, you're going to be stating the prayer that I've said that I often say, which is, may I be of service. May I be in a position to help. Now, you may have something very specific that's on your heart. A friend of mine reached out to me and said, a friend of mine also in the LGBTQIA community was like, the person I want to help most is trans people right now. I think they have the most to lose from this election. I want to show up deeply for them. I want to show up for the trans community. I have some passing privilege and I have other types of privilege, and I want to use that privilege to help. Another person said, I wasn't going to vote and I didn't vote for me, and I voted for my Latino friends and for my trans friends. And so you might have a focus, you know what I mean? And I've mentioned here on this broadcast that it's important to me as a white woman right now to show up for Black women who have showed up so much for social justice and who have not received adequately in return, in my opinion. So you may have a focus, or your focus may simply be, how can I show up for justice, right? There's no right or wrong answer here. The best answer is, what are you passionate about, you know? And because your passion will carry you through even when things feel a little less hopeful. All kinds of help is needed. So we write a petition and we say, may I be of service? May I be of service to the cause? May I be of service to these people? May I be of service to this one particular person I'm concerned with? May I be of service to the cause of justice? You may also feel more passionately against injustice. You may ask, may I be of service in the fight against injustice? May I be of service in the fight against bigotry? Bring me opportunities to play a role of service. Tap into your own intention and your own passion as you word this. Word it in a way that feels like it comes from your heart, not from what you think you should want. And we write this petition and we are going to fold it in the direction towards our heart and hold it over our heart and breathe with it. And as we breathe, we will visualize that we're breathing in the opening of opportunities for you to be of service in this way. And we are breathing out obstacles and roadblocks and limited beliefs. And we are breathing in hope. And we are breathing out despair. We are releasing these things that will not help us show up. And we are breathing in the things that will help us show up. You may choose a number of breaths. The Justice Tarot card is 11, so you might choose 11 breaths to represent justice. And when we're done, I'm going to recommend calling on the element of earth for this one. We're going to plant this intention like we might plant a seed. You might bury it somewhere outside in front of your home, representing that it's something in your garden that you will nurture. If you have a house plant, you might do something like that. And you might even take extra care to water that plant and take good care of it over, the coming weeks. And if you don't have, anything like that, you may choose instead to offer it to another element, offer it to fire, to burn it, and ask fire to transform this intention into tangible reality. To tear it up and let it go on the wind and ask the wind to take your intention away and bring you back your desire, bring you back opportunities to show up for it. To the water. You may choose to toss it into the sea and ask the sea to do the same thing. So, try this at home. Do this summoning spell for purpose and action. And then your job after doing that spell is to pair your spiritual move, the spell, with an active move. And your first active move can be simply to keep your eyes and ears open. It may be to take it a step further and say, I'm looking for ways to serve the cause. I'm looking for ways to help the trans community. I'm looking for ways to show up for Black women in these difficult times. I'm looking for ways to stand up against bigotry, whatever it may be, to share that. In whatever way you may feel safe, you may feel comfortable making, for example, like a public post on social media, or you might just find that you bring it up in different conversations, And that is how we take that intention that we put out spiritually and we make it tangible. We say, I'm actively doing this. I'm actively looking. And we keep our ears and eyes open for those opportunities. And then we act. And we look for opportunities big and small, and we're not judgmental about what opportunities show up at our door. Our ego may want to have a glorious battle with evil and win. What may be needed in reality is for us to bake a lasagna and bring it to somebody, It's not always glamorous. We are not fighting for justice for the glamour. We're doing it because of what is right. So we seek out the opportunities, big and small, to help, and we take the ones that we feel passionate about, that we feel a spark about, that we feel, yes, I can help. Or even the ones that we feel like, well, this is a bit mundane, but it's help, so I feel passionate about the fact that I'm helping, right? Thank you so much for tuning in. Maybe this podcast was a little bit heavy, and I'm going to leave with a request that you seek out hope and you seek out laughter, because it's a heavy time right now for many of us, and many of us are asking how we can show up for it. And I'm asking you, and this is part of me showing up in the way that I know I'm equipped to for as a foot soldier of justice. I'm asking you how you can show up for yourself, because I know that someone has to help the helpers. And I know that I watch so many people who are selfless and kind and giving and do so much for the world not take as good care of themselves and burn out and burn out and burn out. And I'm asking you to cultivate hope and cultivate joy and cultivate care of yourself in your life, so that you can use your two hands and your voice ongoingly, so that you don't burn out. And I'm even asking you to cultivate joy. This is my final invitation to you. And this is going to be the topic of our bonus episode, bonus patrons, cultivating joy in troubled times. Because first of all, like, the first hurdle is no, it's not immoral to seek joy in troubled times. And secondly, it's what gives us the strength to carry on. Anyone with intergenerational trauma can tell you that their family has a history of gallows humor, and that's because laughter is a healer, and because we find joy where we can, even in unlikely places, right? If gallows humor is it for you, fine, do it, you know? Like, a few weeks ago I posted, or not even, it just feels like it's been a few weeks already, I posted sometime last week on the internet that said, find a way to laugh today, find a way to cackle, like full out laugh uproariously. You're not doing anyone any harm by laughing, but you're doing yourself some good, and that allows you to do more good. And a lot of people are like, I don't know if I can. And I'm like, make it simple. Creative problem solving, like watch a Netflix comedy special, you know? Watch a movie or a sitcom that you know is going to make you giggle, and just go for it, you know? Go for the result of your laughter. Go for the result of your joy. Actively put time into your day for joy right now. It's not selfish. It's what will give you the hope to keep going. Because hopeful people make a difference, and people who are despairing eventually become burnt out and complacent. I want you to be hopeful because I know you can make a difference. Thank you so much for listening to SassafrasCast or watching. I will be back. You can reach out to me anytime at Sassafras Tarot on pretty much all of the social medias. I'm on Facebook, Instagram, Threads, TikTok. I'm getting it together to join Blue Sky, but I haven't. YouTube, Twitch. And you can also email me anytime at sassafrastarot@gmail.com if there are topics that you would like to see discussed on the show, or if you just want to share your own opinions or experiences with anything I've shared here. I would love that. That would mean the world to me. Finally, if you do want to support my work here at Sassafras Tarot, you can join the Patreon at patreon.com/Sassafras Tarot. And while I have your ear, if you feel that you have the money to support the arts, can I ask you to split that contribution, whatever you would have made, in half, and give the other half to someone like the ACLU or the NAACP or Planned Parenthood or any of the organizations, or the Trevor Project, any of the organizations actively making a difference right now in these troubled times, because they know how to do it better than you and I can do it. They've been doing the work for a long time, and they know how to make that money make a difference. And many hands make light work. So though I would love for you to join my Patreon or whatever else, right this minute I would love even more for you to make a contribution to something like the ACLU or the NAACP or a local mutual aid looking out for people in your community who are marginalized and need help. I would love to see that. Thank you so much for listening. Remember to seek joy. We'll talk again soon.